Deng Xiaoping's reforms and Kissinger's diplomatic efforts were the perfect recipe for success. It helped create an environment in which China could pursue economic modernization and open its economy to the West.
The announcement I shall now read is being issued simultaneously in Peking and in the United States. Premier Zhou Enlai and Dr. Henry Kissinger, President Nixon's assistant for national security affairs, held talks in Peking from July 9 to 11, 1971. Knowing of President Nixon's expressed desire to visit the People's Republic of China, Premier Zhou Enlai, on behalf of the government of the People's Republic of China, has extended an invitation to President Nixon to visit China at an appropriate date before May 1972. President Nixon has accepted the invitation with pleasure.
In July 1971, President Nixon's then National Security Advisor, Henry Kissinger, made a secret trip to Beijing. It paved the way for President Nixon's historic visit the following year and marked the beginning of normalized relations between the two nations.
When we arrived in China, it was one of the most important occasions of our lives.
We had, at the time, a common adversary in the Soviet Union. The United States wanted to leverage an opening to China of some sort, not knowing where it would head, quite frankly. President Nixon, who really thought strategically about global affairs, did believe that China had to be brought into the world of nations again and not be isolated. It was too important a power, too large of a power. It had too much potential simply to be isolated and angry, as one way that President Nixon described.
Years earlier, the groundwork was already being laid for the historic visits. In 1970, Mao Zedong invited American journalist Edgar Snow to stand with him at Tiananmen Square. A picture of them was published in the People's Daily. It was a message that Nixon was welcome in Beijing. In April 1971, the American table tennis team, which was competing in the World Championships in Japan, was invited to China.
周恩来总理在会见美国乒乓球代表团的时候说你们的来访打开了中美两国人民友好往来的大门，这个就后来称为乒乓外交。
Kissinger's trip was a few months later, in July of 1971. While in Pakistan, Kissinger pretended to fall ill, and he left early from a state dinner. This was his cover to secretly board a plane to China. In Beijing, Kissinger met with Premier Zhou Enlai. When it came to Taiwan, the U.S. recognition of a one China policy was crucial for the talks to move forward. These meetings laid the framework for what would become the Shanghai Communique, signed during Nixon's trip in 1972.
上海公报对最大的好处，也就讲我们是美方声明，台湾海峡两边所有的中国人都认为只有一个中国，台湾是中国的一部分。
I recall that at the beginning, the American side, Dr. Kissinger, provided their draft, which was basically a hazy idea of what both sides agreed to, and it avoided some important issues like the Taiwan issue. So Premier Zhou Enlai came up with a Chinese version, in which was the basic framework of the final communique. The framework was that each side would first mention their own positions, which were very vastly different, and then go on to say what they had in common.
Well, the Nixon trip was symbolically so important because Nixon was historically quite a big critic of China and communism. and it showed pragmatism could work.
Nixon's visit gives a boost of legitimacy to the People's Republic, leading to a wide range of fast diplomatic recognitions of the PRC as the legitimate government of China in a way that the Americans had opposed up until that time.
1971年3月份基辛格中期访问离开北京的那一天，联合国以绝对多数的票数恢复了中国在联合国的合法地位。这个就说明啊，世界各国绝大多数国家都欢迎中美改善关系，欢迎美国采取积极的步骤。
The importance of the relationship between our two countries remains crucial, and as in fact it's more important even than in 1971.
On February 21st, 1972, after months of secret negotiations, President Nixon arrived in Beijing.
Dr. Kissinger's secret mission to China was basically to establish that there would be a presidential visit to China. So President Nixon's visit was the real highlight.
The first handshake was between President Nixon and Premier Zhou Enlai on the tarmac. The main purpose of the trip was to open a relationship with China, and just by reaching across to shake each other's hands, we symbolized the beginning of that process.
Almost immediately after landing, Nixon met face-to-face with Mao Zedong.
It was thought that this interview might just last for, say, 15 minutes, but actually it went on for 70 minutes, because I think they both had much to say to each other. It was an opportunity for the highest leaders of both countries to meet face to face and directly exchange views on how they saw the international scene and the relations between the two countries. It was a personal contact, and that, I think, set the stage for the development of future relations.
Xiaoping, communist to the core, vice premier and the real power in the new China so long ignored, being greeted by an American president and his wife and called friend.
Months prior to his 1979 trip to the U.S., Deng Xiaoping had announced China's new reform and opening up policy. China would now welcome foreign trade and investment. Kissinger's 1971 trip to China signaled the beginnings of normalized relations, and Deng's visit fully realized those diplomatic ties.
I would like to read a joint communique which is being simultaneously issued in Peking at this very moment by the leaders of the People's Republic of China. A joint communique on the establishment of diplomatic relations between the United States of America and the People's Republic of China, January 1st, 1979.
太平洋地区两岸的两个重要国家发展友好合作关系，对于促进太平洋地区和世界的和平，无疑将是一个重要的因素。
It was the first time that Chinese people had seen a lot of America on their television. There was very little on America on Chinese TV until Deng Xiaoping went to America. So that was really an eye-opening experience for both the U.S. and China. I think the U.S. and China was on a very strong path from 79 right through the 80s. And you could see it by the numbers of visitations, the investment began to soar, the exchanges between the U.S. and China.
President Nixon at the time was asked about its significance, he said it was the week that changed the world. People thought that was trite, that was banal, that was not significant. Turned out he was quite right. That trip was the catalyst for many of those changes. That trip opened the door for China to the world and enabled China to begin to play the important role that it now plays in global governance and global affairs.